you have to write a paper about another culture. So this is just a list of books that I have about different cultures. Some of them are novels, some of them are kind of long. I didn't include the one that's 1,700 pages. I know, it's about Japan. It's actually a really good book, but I have like 3 or 4 others by the same guy. So Murakami, Haruki Murakami, really good author, one of the best as far as the Japanese are concerned. Fascinating culture. So one of the things I want you to do is find out about another culture. Well, one of the ways you can do that is by reading fiction, as odd as that may seem. You might think that, well, you have to read nonfiction to understand a culture, right? Well, sometimes you can put more stuff in a fiction book than you can in a nonfiction. And if it's a nonfiction book, it sounds like you're stereotyping. So a lot of people don't do that. Anyway. Okay, what'd you guys decide about ethnocentrism? Are the Navajo ethnocentric?
I agree with it.
You think they are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, here the Navajo
The elevator must have arrived. You need a chair? Here's one. Okay. Pretty cool. So they are ethnocentric. If you have, most of you probably have a certificate of Indian blood, I imagine. Didn't they issue you one when you federal government decided that in order for you to get Indian benefits, you had to have a certificate of Indian blood. So you have a certificate of Indian blood, and that tells you what percentage of what tribes you are, right? And many of you may say 100% Navajo. Is that possible?
It's they go by quarters, like 1/4, 3/4, half, or 4 out of 4.
1/32. You think I'm kidding? When I worked up north, none of those guys were pure anything. They were all a lot of different tribes. But then again, they lived on a reservation with 2 different tribes. And there was a reservation right down the road, about 50 miles, that was another group, another Chippewa Cree. And then there was one maybe 100 miles to the east, and it was 4 different bands of Sioux, 2 Nakota and 2 Lakota, which was kind of interesting. So, yeah, there was a lot of intermarriage going on. Anyway, so their certificate of Indian blood was really kind of interesting. How Navajo do you have to be able to vote in the election today? What is your quantum, your blood quantum, what does it have to be? I'm just curious. A quarter? 25%? That's not bad. Okay. Some tribes it's an eighth. As strange as that may seem. So, the Navajo are ethnocentric. Okay. Does everybody agree? Does anybody disagree? You're the most welcoming group of individuals in the whole wide world. You'll let anybody in. Is that the way it works? Not according to Wilson anyway. Does Wilson tell you you have to marry within your tribe? Isn't that what he says? He said that to Sue, or to Sarah, I mean. He said that to Sarah. She got upset because she's married to an Navajo. Oh, fun. Okay. So where are we? Okay. Yeah, so almost all groups are ethnocentric. Otherwise you wouldn't be a group. Potentially you wouldn't be a group at all. You would have joined another group, or another group would have taken over or something. Therefore, ethnocentrism is kind of the way the world works. All right, oops, I'm here. Well, I thought I would start. No, I'm here. Okay, ethnocentrism. Yeah, so we were talking about ethnocentrism last time. And they decided without you, that now holds our ethnocentrism. Okay. But you can disagree if you like. No? Okay, that's correct. Okay. Okay. So most groups are ethnocentric. Almost all groups are ethnocentric. And that's just the way the world works. Okay. All right. In the 1950s, with the advance of brain imaging techniques, psychology entered the cognitive revolution. This is where cognitive psychology came from. If you talk to Sarah, she will tell you, she will brag about the fact that she's a cognitive psychologist. She brags about it. She's a cognitive psychologist. Well, in the beginning, the cognitive psychologists were really kind of interesting people because what they did, they rejected all of these other theories. They rejected Freud, Skinner, Watson, Rogers, the touchy-feely type guys. They rejected all those people and they said, we want to see it. If we can't see it, we want to image it. We want to take a picture of it. And if we can't do that, then it doesn't exist. That's the way the cognitivists first started. One of the fathers of the cognitive revolution was Jerome Bruner. I'll show you a picture of him. He's right here. That's Jerome Bruner when he graduated from Harvard University. He argued that the proponents of the cognitive revolution had become distracted from its initial vision by becoming more concerned with computer metaphors for understanding the functioning of the mind. The cognitive revolution was really kind of fascinating because into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, these individuals were claiming that the human brain was like a computer, and they tried to compare the human brain to a computer, which, like I've said before, is backwards. The computer comes from the human brain, not the human brain coming from the computer. So they were trying to explain something in a different manner than they probably should have. And there are still a group of these individuals that are trying to mechanize the description of the human brain. So they talk about the human brain as if it's a machine, as confusing as that is. And these people still are out there. As a matter of fact, Sarah went to Northwestern. There is a cognitive psychologist there who still claims that they try to mechanize the human brain at Northwestern. I don't think she studied under the individual. I don't think that was the individual that she was under. However, these individuals still exist. Bruner claimed that, and of course Bruner was kind of a revolutionary. So we have all these individuals that are trying to show how the human brain is just like the computer, and we have other individuals that are going, no, you can't do that because what we need to look for is meaning. We're trying to help people. We're trying to fix people. And the only way we can do that is by trying to figure out what the meaning is. If you are a cognitive psychologist and you are one of those mechanizers, the individuals who try to make the human brain into a machine, you would look at the shooter in Jacksonville or the shooter in Las Vegas, and you'd say, well, you did during the autopsy, didn't you do a brain scan to find out if he had any tumors? They would be talking about things pressing against areas of the brain causing the problem. They're looking for that kind of a problem. Now the reality is that most of these shooters, we're not finding tumors in their brains. As a matter of fact, even if they just had a psychological profile done, they were normal. And here all of a sudden they pick up a pistol and shoot 17 people down in Parkland. Get shot 17 people. Or 57 people died in Las Vegas. The shooter in Jacksonville, he killed 2 other people and then he killed himself. So 3 people died. It's kind of interesting because they keep talking about the 2 people that were killed in Jacksonville. And actually there were 3, but they're not counting him as the 3rd. Isn't that interesting? So we only killed 2 people. The suicide didn't count as a killing? I don't know. I don't understand this. Anyway, so if you were a cognitivist, you would claim that you would be looking for a structure to change things. But of course, Jerome Bruner said we need to look for meaning.
rather than information. We need to look for meaning making rather than information processing. The human brain doesn't process information, but it also interprets, and that's the meaning making. And of course, Bruner was saying we need to look at more of a psychological aspect of the human brain. Bruner argued that cultural psychology has picked up the torch that was originally carried by early proponents of the cognitive revolution and has again addressed how people derive meaning from their environment. In other words, interpretation. We're looking for an interpretation, okay? And that's Jerome Bruner. So we can't really argue with the cognitive revolution. We can't because we started visualizing what separate neurons and how separate neurons were working. We can't argue with it, but at the same time, it really doesn't mean anything because people interpret what is happening. And you may interpret things totally differently than I do because we have different experiences. Therefore, I would see things a little bit different than you do. Hopefully I would anyway. And that's the end of chapter 1. Okay, let's go on to chapter 2. It's a little confusing. I started reading this chapter and going, really? Are you kidding me? But I'll try to make it make sense. And if it doesn't make any sense to me, it certainly isn't going to make any sense to Holt. Maybe it will, anyway. It has to do with interpretation. Unfortunately, of course, everything's dark. This is about culture and human nature. Humans are quite particular about whom they choose to imitate. Humans are said to have prestige bias. So you wouldn't imitate the drunk guy that urinates on himself down at the gas station. Probably he wouldn't be the person you'd try to imitate. You'd try to imitate somebody else, somebody more positive. So we have what we call prestige bias. Maybe you want to imitate Donald Trump. Start combing your hair. Oh. Maybe you want to be a billionaire like Donald Trump, or maybe you want to be a billionaire like Gates. What's Gates' first name? Who? What? Who?
Bill Gates.
Bill. There you go. Bill. Maybe you want to be just like Bill. He's funny looking. Put the big glasses on. I don't know. Okay, but we have prestige bias. We want to be like somebody that we enjoy or that we think is good. When I was young, I wanted to be a baseball player. My favorite baseball player was Willie Mays. Willie Mays he walks like this. But he was really fast, so I tried to walk like that, but I can't because I'm knock-kneed. So I'm like, he and I are like direct opposites. I'm white, he's black. You know, there's a lot of different things that were different as far as Willie Mays and I were concerned. We're both about, well, he's 5'10" and I'm 5'6", so that's another thing. What else? When he was playing, he weighed 180 pounds, and I'm right there. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm 4 inches shorter than he was. Anyway, so we have prestige bias. You wouldn't want to be the really bad first baseman that can barely catch the ball. That's not the one that you would want to imitate. You would want to imitate the guy that hits home runs every time. You wouldn't want to be the center that can't get back and forth down the court. You'd want to be Michael Jordan, who hits layups all the time, or you'd want to be LeBron James. You would want to imitate somebody with prestige. They are especially concerned with detecting who has prestige. That is, they seek others who have skills and are respected by others. So this is, and this is really kind of interesting because if you've ever listened to teenage girls talk about boys, I was a teacher for a while in a high school, and for some reason, girls wanted to talk to me about their boyfriends. But then I would hear them talking with each other, and my goodness gracious, they would be comparing. Well, you don't want to date him. You know, his sister is mean. You know, that kind of stuff. Or wow, he's really cute. Yeah, you ought to date him. You know, that kind of stuff. Isn't that the way it works? So actually, you're looking for you're trying to select an individual that your friends find acceptable. and that has to do with prestige. Do guys do the same thing? Do we? We ask our friends, do you think I should date Sarah? Sally? Sue? Selena? I don't know. Should I date that person? Is that the way we do it? I didn't know that. I guess I never had any friends. That's my problem. Anyway, so we're looking for a respected other, and they try to imitate these individuals and what they are doing. You don't want to imitate the guy that can't shoot straight. If you're a hunter, you want to imitate the guy that always gets his deer or whatever. Imitating prestigious others is a very efficient way of cultural learning. So we will follow select individuals. And this normally is what happens with presidents of the United States. We tried to emulate Barack Obama. If you're a Bush fan, maybe you wanted to imitate George W. Bush. Kennedy, people talk about Kennedy. People talk about George W. Bush's father, who didn't have an accent, by the way, didn't have a Southern accent. But George did. George was raised in Texas, and his father was raised in Connecticut. They both went to Yale, but George ended up with a Texas accent, and his father didn't. So you try to emulate people that you admire, whether it's a baseball player, a basketball player, or whether it's a president of the United States. Individuals are more likely to learn successfully if they target these people who are especially talented. And of course, we can think of the individuals that you tried to dress like, tried to act like, tried to emulate the way that they did things. Maybe it was a preacher at your church. You tried to emulate that select individual. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was potentially it was a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt. Identifying signs of prestige and then imitating people who have displayed those signs are skills that were likely selected for in the course of human evolution. So we have been doing this for the evolution of humanity. We have selected an individual that is correct or that is the most prestigious, and that is the individual that we've tried to imitate. And this is a good thing because it has taught us culture. So we try to emulate somebody that we respect. So if traditionally, if the person that you respect is a roadman, then potentially it would be Wilson, or maybe it would be Avery, or someone. And this has happened throughout history. You've got a very good hunter in your group, so that is the individual you try to emulate. You try to stalk game the same way that he does. You try to carry the same number of arrows or bullets that he does. You try to get downwind from your prey or whatever. Anyway, you try to emulate that select individual, and this is how we learn culture. There have been religious people in different groups, depending on what religion it was, but the religious people would be the individuals that you tried to emulate. If you know anything about the Catholic Church teaches you that you need to follow all of these rules. And they have all of these rules, not just written down, but they talk about them every holy day. They talk about all of these rules that you're supposed to try to follow. As much fun as that is. So potentially that's what you would do. You would try to imitate these select individuals. And this is how we learn culture. In my family, we learned culture. We didn't go to church. We did go to school, but we didn't go to church. And we tried to emulate potentially my parents. All my brothers and sisters tried to emulate our parents. And now when I have an argument with my conservative brother, he claims that my dad was just like he is. And of course, I lived with my dad just as long as he did. And I know that he's full of, what is that stuff? Bananas? Yeah, bananas. He was full of bananas. My brother's full of bananas. My dad hated Ronald Reagan, who was the beginning of the conservative movement in the United States. He hated him because of the banking laws. My dad was a banker, and Ronald Reagan changed all the banking laws, and then they started having trouble. Banks started having trouble. You probably don't remember the savings and loan explosion of the 1986, 1987, 1988. All right, yeah. It was because they changed all the banking laws. My dad was pissed, big time, really upset. So, anyway, so we emulate people. We emulate people that we admire. Our ancestors who did this were more likely to acquire the highly useful cultural knowledge that gave them a survival advantage compared with those who did not. So if you come from a family that was successful, oh, I've got keys. I've got Marius's keys. Remind me I've got Marius's keys. Okay. Poor Marius. Can't get into any place. Anyway, so the people that emulated the right individuals, they were the ones that survived, and the individuals that did not survive. Kind of interesting if you are looking at the Grovant tribe was huge. It was huge. It was 600 lodges. There were about 10 people in every lodge. Each lodge was a family. There were about 10 people in every lodge. They had 600 lodges. And they broke up into two groups, and you would follow whoever you wanted to. You could switch if you wanted to. But there were two holy men that led each group. They were buffalo hunters, and from time to time, one group would be more successful than the other. And of course, depending on who the holy man was and where he took you, and of course, at a select time in the wintertime, they would make one large camp. But during the buffalo hunting season, they followed different holy men who said that they knew where the buffalo were. Okay, and of course, if they were right and were successful, then they were able to get enough buffalo to survive. And if they weren't, of course, they got hungry, got real hungry, and they hoped the other group had found them. And so the next time, most of the people followed the one that was successful the last season, which makes a lot of sense. Anyway, and we do this all the time. Humans have what is known as a theory of the mind. In other words, I understand that you don't think the same way that I do, and that's known as theory of the mind. When you're a child, you think that everybody knows the same thing that you know. Everybody thinks the same way that you think. Now, this can be a really serious problem. So here it is, it's 1940, 1941. The world is exploding in warfare, and the United States hasn't done anything yet. We're just putting our armies together, Nobody's attacked us. There's no reason. We haven't declared war against the Germans. We haven't declared war against the Japanese. Nothing's going on. The Japanese, and it looks like we have dodged a bullet, because it looks like the Japanese are not going to attack, or that the Japanese don't want to fight us. And they've told us, we don't want to fight you. We're not going to declare war. We just want to expand our sphere of influence to Asian people. We don't want to have anything to do with the United States. So we're going to leave you alone. And they sent peace envoys to the United States. And the peace envoys were in Washington, D.C. on December 7th. Well, on December 7th was the day that they attacked Pearl Harbor. There were people in Washington claiming that they didn't want anything but peace. The Japanese didn't want anything but peace. It was a sneak attack. Or was it? Was it? Should we have known that the Japanese wanted to attack us? They certainly looked like they were attacking people all over the place. Why in the world would they not attack us? We thought that they were like us, that their mindset was like ours, that they were good Christians. Are they good Christians? Well, they're not Christian at all. Their mindset was totally different than ours. In Japan, if you know somebody is your enemy, then you look for that person to attack. And they thought we were stupid because we didn't understand how the world worked. So as far as the Japanese are concerned, it wasn't a sneak attack. We were just so dumb that we missed it. If you've ever watched a Japanese movie about samurais, sometimes their sword comes out and they chop somebody's head off without any negative words being spoken. It's not a sneak attack. As far as they're concerned, it wasn't a sneak attack. So if you read what the Japanese say about Pearl Harbor,
They claimed that it was a great victory. They claimed it was a great victory. And of course, the Americans are just pissed off like crazy because it was a sneak attack. They had their peace envoys right there in Washington, D.C. And we felt like they snuck up behind us and attacked us. That's not right. Well, what was our problem? We thought that they think like we do. Why are we so upset about 9/11? Isn't that what terrorists do? Shouldn't we have known that if these are terrorists and they don't like us, that they may attack us? They'll do it, and they will do it in any way possible? Isn't that the way it works? Or do they have to tell us that they're going to attack? Would we tell them that we were going to attack? But see, we have to understand that these people have different ideas than we do. And they're just different ideas. When the European armies first came to the Americas, they were really upset with native tribes because you guys wouldn't stand up, you wouldn't stand there and let them shoot at you, and then they shot, that's the way your European armies fought. They got their nose to nose and they lifted their rifles and shot at each other. And the side that won was the side with the most men. That's the way European wars were being fought. So they were real upset with natives because you guys hid behind trees. That's not fair. You guys are cheating. You're winning all these battles and it's cheating. That's not right. So they had to change the way that they fought. They had to fight. Had to change the way that they fought battles because the mindset was totally different. So that's one of the important things about learning about another culture. That was one of the important things about learning about the Vietnamese. We needed to know how these people thought. Are they thinking the same way that we do? Do they have the same morals that we have? And the answer was no. They were a collectivist society. They fought a totally different war than we do. It's the same way in Afghanistan. It's the same way in Iraq. It's the same way in Syria. And I got news for you. It's the same way with the Russians. The Russians are not the same as we are. They don't have the same mindset that we do. We need to understand that they are different and they have a different way of thinking of things. We're going to talk about the Russians. They ain't the same as us. We as Americans. Americans think one way and other people think totally different. And that was one of the problems in Vietnam. I mean, we had 500,000 men over there at one time. So why didn't we just walk all over the place? I mean, there were 500,000 soldiers. The North Vietnamese had less than 100,000 soldiers. The Viet Cong had probably less than 50,000 soldiers. Why in the world didn't we win that war? We didn't understand what the war was all about. We thought the war was about politics. The war was it was a civil war. It was a civil war between the Buddhists and the Catholics. It was a civil war between the Montagnards, the people who live up in the mountains, and the people that live down in the river valleys. It was a civil war, and we didn't understand what was going on. So that's what we have to do. We have to understand, and this is why it's important, especially for military people, to understand that other individuals don't have the same ideas that you do. One of the things that happened in Afghanistan, my brother was over there in 2005. And my brother, despite the fact that he's a crazy conservative, is not a religious person. So while he was over there, he had no problems dealing with the people that were in charge of the Afghan army. He had no problems dealing with the local chieftains. The reason is because he didn't try to convert them to Christianity. He didn't talk about religion because he didn't know jack squat about religion. And of course, these people are Muslim and they don't want to hear it. Just like you don't want people to come to your house and try to convert you to whatever religion they happen to be. They didn't want to hear it. So he had no problem. He had the most peaceful province in all of Afghanistan. He was never attacked. His convoys were never attacked. Never. He didn't suffer any losses while he was over there. The guy that replaced him was an evangelical Christian. And guess what he did?
He tried to proselytize. He tried to convert the chieftains. He tried to convert all these people from Islam to Christianity. He wanted, I mean, that's his job, right? If you're a good Christian, your job is to convert people to your religion, right? That's what it says in the Bible anyway. You're supposed to convert everybody to your religion. And when he did that, guess what happened next? They got pissed, and he started losing men. And it wasn't because they weren't as good as soldiers. It had nothing to do with being soldiers. It had to do with the fact that he didn't understand what was going on there. And he wouldn't shut up. All he needed to do was keep his mouth shut. But he couldn't do that. And all of a sudden, that province became the most destructive province in all of Afghanistan. They had more trouble with the Taliban. They had people joining the enemy right and left. It was insane. And while my brother was there, they had no problem at all. Mainly because he kept his mouth shut. And I don't know if he understood. He's a pretty smart guy. I don't know if he understood it or if he just didn't care. But he didn't have any problem at all. But the other guy did, because he wouldn't shut up. Yeah. Does all that make sense? So this whole theory of mine is really important. One of the reasons that the federal government has had so much trouble with American Indians is because they kept confronting different groups, different tribes, and they assumed that they understood Indians because they just talked to the group back in Missouri. And they thought all Indians were the same. Well, that's stupid. Well, now we know that it's stupid, but they thought it was. They thought it made sense. They treated the buffalo hunters just like they treated the people in the Southwest. And you can't do that. That's one of the reasons why it took them like forever to defeat the Apaches. As stupid as that sounds, they were trying to fight the Apache the same way they fought the Sioux and the Cheyenne up in the north. Marius will tell you all this. Okay, so that's what the theory of the mind has to do with. Theory of the mind has to do with understanding that other people have different ideas than you do. Imitative learning is where the learner copies precisely what they think the model is trying to do. That's imitative learning. Emulative learning is where the learner is focused on the environmental events that are involved. That's emulative learning. So emulative learning, you're looking at the total environment. And in imitative learning, you're doing you're imitating exactly what the other person is doing. The emulative learner is only focused on the events that happen around the model, not what the model intends to accomplish. So of the two, the imitative learning is more likely to be successful. Well, we are humans, so yeah, imitative learning is more likely to be successful. The emulative learner, of course, they're looking at everything else in the environment. So they're kind of missing the point. In emulative learning, you learn one task but can't use that knowledge in any other context. But in imitative learning, you learn the task. And since you've learned this task, now you can take that knowledge and you can use it in other situations. But the emulative learner, they only learn the one thing at the one time. If you've ever trained animals of any kind at all, horses or dogs or whatever, you can teach them to roll over when you say a certain word. But they're not going to start rolling over just because you're talking to the dog. They're not going to be rolling over and over and over and over. It just doesn't work that way. So you have to teach them one thing at a time. When I say this is what you do. When I say this is what you do. If it was a human, of course, that you were training, because they're imitative, they would use that knowledge in different contexts. They would be able to do that. Human cultural learning is cumulative, of course. Human cultural learning tends to be imitative rather than emulative. Cultural information grows in complexity and often in utility over time. So we accumulate information. We don't forget cultural information. Despite the fact that we very rarely have anything to do with horses now, that knowledge is still out there. And we still understand what to do with horses. Even though now we drive cars, we still have that information. And this is known as the ratchet effect, the fact that we never lose information. We never lose knowledge. It's cumulative. So we are in a situation where we just keep accumulating information. Cultural information can continue to accumulate without losing the earlier information, and of course, that's primarily the way it works. So despite the fact that somebody became a Protestant and they follow the Protestant religion, they still understand the church, and they still understand the church before it became, before the Protestants split off from the Roman Catholics. They can still understand all of that. All that information is still there. It's actually, well, it's not really in the Bible. It's the Bible's kind of an interesting book. To have cumulative cultural evolution, you need creative invention, reliable and faithful social transmission. So you need to transmit this information in a social context so that everybody has the information, and you need somebody that is creative. The wheel, for example. The wheel wasn't invented everywhere at the same time, as confusing as that is. When the Europeans first made it over to China, they had no wheels. There were no wheels. They didn't have carts. They didn't have anything. But they had invented the wheel down in Korea, as interesting as that is. So if you look at an early cart from Korea, it didn't have 4 wheels. It didn't have 2 wheels. It had 1 wheel. It was right in the middle of the cart. It was this great big single wheel. So when they stopped, they either had to prop it up against something or they had to lay it down. As interesting as that is. Were there wheels in the Americas? Were there wheels any place in the Americas when Europeans first got over here? I can't think of any. Not right off the top of my head. So that's a technological achievement that occurred in Europe, but it didn't occur in the Americas. It also didn't occur in Asia, where they didn't have wheels. It especially didn't occur in Japan, because Japan was the isolated kingdom. So in Japan, if you wanted to transport one thing from one place to another, you had to get 4 guys with 2 poles and something slung in between the 2 poles. And they did this, and they got really upset, because that almost completely destroyed their economy as soon as Europeans started not invading isn't really the right word. Them starting to have things to do with the Europeans. It almost destroyed their economy, because they had all these guys that were porters. Now, what are you going to do with all these guys that used to carry stuff around from one place to another? All these porters. What are you going to do with all those guys? It almost destroyed their economy. They were really upset. The Japanese were really upset. Now they had to figure out something to do with all these people with no income. And all these individuals were raising families off of all of this stuff. I was born and raised in Muncie, Indiana. And Muncie, Indiana used to be a factory town. All those factories are now closed. What do we do with all those guys that worked in the factories? The Japanese had the same situation with technology. What are they going to do with all these guys who used to carry stuff around? We got to do something with them, don't we? What are we going to do with all those factory workers? That's one of the reasons why Donald Trump was elected president. You got all these factory guys that have nothing to do, and they want the factories to come back. And he promised them he was going to bring the factories back. He's going to bring all of the manufacturing back to the United States. That's what he promised them. I know. Has it come back? Not yet. Or ever. Why won't it come back? You guys are smart. Why won't the manufacturing come back to the United States? Where's it gone?
Overseas.
It's gone overseas. Primarily
Over there.
primarily to China. So why isn't it coming back? Really? I mean, we're smart. We know that this isn't going to happen. Why isn't it going to come back?
Because it's cheaper over there.
It is cheaper over there. You think these guys want to work for $4 an hour? $1 an hour. $4, that's too much. It's way too much. One of the reasons that all of our stuff is so cheap is because it's made in China where it's relatively inexpensive. Then of course we have transportation costs that are added to that, but still it's cheaper than it would be to make it in the United States. It's one of the reasons why we don't make anything in the United States anymore. We can't make computers in the United States. Apple makes all their computers in China. My shoes are made in Vietnam. As odd as that seems, these are Newtons from Colorado. Really? No, they're from Vietnam. But they're sold by Newton. They're made for Newton and they're sold by Newton. Okay, anyway. Why are we talking about this? Oh, we're talking about reliable social transmission. High fidelity social transmission requires an accurate, imitative learning and sophisticated communication. So the more communication you have, the more sophisticated it is, the quicker that people will start imitating you. And we can see this with just about anything. With clothes. We change the way that we wear clothes. Back in the 1950s, if you watch an old movie from the 1940s or 1950s, every guy is wearing a hat. Everybody has a hat on. Humphrey Bogart wears a hat. Any star is wearing a hat when he goes outside. If you look at Indiana Jones, didn't he wear a fedora? Well, back then everybody wore fedoras. Everybody had to have a hat on. You never went outside without a hat. As stupid as that sounds, well, I don't know how stupid it is. Now nobody wears a hat unless you wear a baseball cap, right? But nobody wears a fedora. Sheldon Begay used to wear a fedora. Remember he wore that for like a semester or something. He still does? Okay, I haven't seen him lately. No species but humans have shown these capacities. We have the ability to create societies. We have the ability to create civilizations. And the reason we do this is because we have this concept of imitating. We have this concept of projecting our information to other individuals, and they are able to pick it up. If we look at other primates, if we look at orangutans, if we look at chimpanzees, they don't have the same civilizations. They don't have any civilizations. They are just bands of chimpanzees, and they don't have the same knowledge. And the reason is because they're emulated, and they're not imitated. We are the only imitative species, as strange as that may seem. The larger the group of people, the better cultural information can be maintained and improved upon. So it has to be a large group of individuals. The more individuals in the group, the more likely that you're going to come up with good ideas. The smaller the group, what's the probability? What's the probability of a small high school having 7 or 10 good basketball players? A small high school. What's the probability? Doesn't happen very often, does it? And that's one of the reasons why most of the states have gone to classes. So you have small schools, you have medium schools, you have large schools. You have really, really large schools, right? Isn't that the way it works in Arizona? Okay, there was only one state that didn't do that, and that was the state of Indiana. They used to have a basketball tournament that included everybody. And the little team never won. The little guys never won, except once. It happened in 1954. And if you've ever seen the movie Hoosiers, that's a movie about this small school actually winning the state championship. And they beat one of the larger schools in the state. And everybody just went gaga because, well, it happened that one time. It never happened again. Now Indiana has gone to classes. So when you have a small group of individuals, a small group of individuals, what's the probability of finding a really good basketball team, a really good baseball team? What's the probability of that happening? It's not very high. And for that reason, of course, the larger the group, the more likely that you're going to find innovation. There will be more innovations that come from a larger group than from a smaller group. So a larger group will be more likely to have at least one person stumble onto a good idea. A lot of good ideas come out of the United States, but we're not the largest country in the world. We're not the most populous country in the world. We're the third most populous country in the world. China has 1.5 billion, India has 1.2 billion, and we have 325 million. And we're number 3. So stuff comes out of the United States. Innovative things come out of here. So what's going on with India and China? They have more people, but they're both collectivist countries. We're an individualistic country. And because of that, we have all these interesting, innovative ideas coming out of the United States. And of course, Donald Trump has complained about that. He said that we need to stop all of this information from leaving the United States and going over to China. They're stealing our good ideas. Edison's got a NASA sticker on the back of his computer. I just was reminded that the guy that shot up the tournament down in Jacksonville, his father was an engineer for NASA, which I found kind of interesting. Looking at the Polynesians settling the South Pacific, the islands with the largest populations at the time of first contact had far more different kinds of tools than the islands with the smallest populations. This is really kind of fascinating. I apologize for the darkness. Bigger populations allowed for the more rapid spread of cultural innovations. So if we look at the Polynesians, all the Polynesians on all of the islands in the Pacific, what we found was Hawaii, of course, with a large population. Hawaii with a large population had a lot more tools than one of these tiny little places with very few people. Tiny little places like Tahiti, Kiribati, all of those little bitty tiny places. However, sometimes the ratchet slips and the population will lose ideas. This does seem to happen. This happened with the Aboriginal population that inhabited Tasmania from the Australian mainland. So we had Aborigines all over Australia. Some of them made their way across the strait, the Bass Strait, which is between Tasmania and, this is Tasmania down here, and this is Australia. So the guys that went to Tasmania, they actually lost some of the innovations they had when they were up in Australia, as confusing as that is. When the Europeans initially arrived in Tasmania, they found scattered foraging bands of humans utilizing the simplest technology. Archaeological digs have shown that the technology seen in their past was far more advanced than what was demonstrated in their current technology. So they actually lost technology. This is very, very rare for people to forget something, for everybody to forget something. Because normally it's cumulative. Remember, everything is cumulative. Why in the world would you forget it? You've got the spear point. You make the spear point this way. You've got an example of that spear point. So why in the world would you lose it? But sometimes it happens, and we have seen cases where they have actually lost technology. Comparing the Tasmanian Aborigines with those across the Bass Strait in Australia, the Tasmanians maintained a toolkit of only 24 items, whereas the Australians maintained a toolkit of hundreds of items. So they lost all of these tools. They had them before they went to Tasmania, but because of their isolation, and because nobody reminded them of all these other tools, they lost them. The Tasmanians had lost bone tools, so they weren't able to make tools out of bone. They lost all their cold weather clothing, which is really kind of sad, because if you notice, they were farther south, closer to the Antarctica. They lost fish hooks, so they couldn't fish anymore, and they lost boomerangs. Of course, the Aborigines in Australia hunt with boomerangs. Other groups where the ratchet seems to have slipped include the Melanesians of the Torres Islands north of Australia. And this is actually a picture of those Aborigine, or the Melanesians on Torres Island. The reclusive Siriano in Bolivia, and that is actually a picture of that group of individuals. It's hot there, so they don't wear clothes. It's hot in Brazil, and they don't wear clothes. The Piraha of Brazil also lost technology as well. So there are groups that have lost technology, which is kind of fascinating because most people are able to maintain their ideas over time. It's really kind of interesting if you go to a museum or something, you'll see a tool and you'll say, well, what the hell did they do with that? I'm sorry. They say, what in the world, what in the world did they do with that? And of course you need to either read what it says there as to what it was. But a lot of times people can't understand what that was used for. I get some historical magazines, and sometimes they'll show an instrument of one kind or another, or a machine of one kind or another, and they'll ask people, does anybody know what this is used for? You go to Cracker Barrel and you see all that old stuff on the wall. Do you recognize all that stuff? Have you ever seen any of this stuff? Do you have any clue as to what they actually use that stuff for? And of course, there are people that remember. My mother's not with us anymore, but she grew up during the Depression. So they used a lot of these strange things, these strange instruments. And so she used to give us all that information. Now the sad part is there are a lot of people who don't care. That's really kind of sad. I mean, somebody needs to remember what they used that for, right? Sure, somebody needs to be the historian, don't they? Maybe you don't care, but I want to know. I mean, I'm really curious that way. But a lot of people, they just don't, I would say give a shit, but I'm not going to say that because the baby's at home. She's got earplugs.
No, one side.
She's got one on one side. Okay, I'll try to control myself. Humans are a cultural species that exist within worlds consisting of cultural information that is accumulated over history. You guys have this information. You have a select way of butchering a sheep. It may not be the same way that they butcher sheep in Greece. May not be the same way that they butcher sheep in Serbia. It may not be the same way they butcher sheep in Mongolia. But you have your own way of doing things. So you live within a cultural context. And there is a right way and a wrong way to do things. And maybe in Serbia they do it totally different because they like a different taste with their sheep. I don't know. Maybe culture. Maybe they feed their sheep different things. Maybe their sheep are a different breed, and they like that flavor. They like that whatever. I told you when I had I was eating at that Afghan lady's house. She gave me the eyeball to eat of the goat. She plucked it right out of the goat's head, which was right there on top of all this rice and stuff. Actually, the rice tasted pretty good, but I'm not much of a goat eye eater. Sharon, of course, loves goat's eyes, but I'm not much of a goat eye eater. Anyway, cultural ideas greatly influence the ways that we live our lives, determining much of what we do on a daily basis. We are all born into rich cultural worlds, and we are constantly learning and being influenced by the shared ideas that make up our culture. We talked about I can't even remember the name of those guys, the ones that used oral sex as a way to become male, as a way to become masculine. Different cultural ideas. And every culture is rich unto itself. Our brain size is determined by the encephalization quotient, the ratio of the brain weight of an animal to that predicted for a comparable animal of the same body size. So we compare humans to other creatures, to other animals. And one of the things we have discovered is that we're not the smartest animal in the world as far as brain size is concerned. We don't have the largest brain. I know this is tragic. I mentioned this down in Mississippi and they almost lynched me when I was teaching at Mississippi University for Women. There is a fish with a larger brain than we have. And they were shocked and appalled and they were ready to shoot me. For humans, it is 4.6, or that we have 4 to 5 times larger brain than another mammal our size. So if we look at another mammal that weighs between 150 and 200 pounds, their brain would be a select size. Ours is 4.5 times larger than that would be. So our brains are really important, but we don't have the biggest brains of all the animals in the world. Only the tiny but big-brained shrew, there's a shrew, a little mouse that has a higher ratio than humans, and they maintain a brain that accounts for 10% of their body weight. So what you need to do, your brain weighs about 3 pounds. So what you need to do is you need to take your weight, you need to multiply it times 0.1, and that's how big your brain would be. I weighed myself this morning, I weighed 190 pounds, so my brain would weigh 19 pounds. How would you like to be carrying around a 19-pound brain? My brain's only weighs 3 pounds right now, but you can imagine how big my head would be. I mean, I wouldn't be able to get it through the doorway if my brain actually weighed 19 pounds. That's the way the shrew is. It's 10% of its body weight. You can imagine how big that is. Anyway, why does a shrew need such a big brain? Sharon knows. What is it? There's got to be a reason why this little mouse thing has such a big head. They must look like one of those, you go down to Mexico during the Day of the Dead and they've got all those people walking around with those giant heads on. That must be what they look like. What could it possibly be? I know. What if our heads were really that big? Just think of how much material it would take for a hat. You're playing baseball and you need a baseball cap, and you get a tent and putting it on your head. This is a tragedy. I'm glad we have small heads. I've always been amazed at how small a deer's head is. It's tiny. Their bodies are big, and they've got this little bitty tiny head. Why? Don't they need any brains at all? They're kind of dumb. They keep running in front of my car. Anyway, our brains consume about 16% of our basal metabolism, even though our brains only represent 2% of our body weight. It still burns up about 16% of the energy that we produce. The brain of the average mammal only consumes about 3% of their basal metabolism. So for some reason, we evolved needing lots more intelligence to survive. I mean, if we went fist to fist with a lion, what's the probability of survival? If we tried to fight a lion, what do you think? Would we win? Probably not. We're pretty wimpy as far as animals go. We just about can't beat anything. Didn't Leonardo DiCaprio made a movie about fighting a bear? Didn't he fight a bear?
Yeah.
Didn't it have sex with him or something? That's what somebody said. I don't know. Anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio. Did he beat the bear? I mean, he must have, because he survived in the movie. Was he able to kill the bear? Yeah. Okay. I was so worried. Leonardo got killed. Anyway, okay. So other animals, they consume about 3% of their basal metabolism. The brain of the marsupial only consumes 1% of their basal metabolism. If you've ever been around possums, they're dumb as dirt. Really are stupid. Now the interesting thing about Australia, almost all their animals are marsupials. All their cats, all their dogs, dingoes are actually marsupials. The Tasmanian tiger was a marsupial. They think it's extinct. But almost all of, the kangaroos, they're all marsupials. In order to maintain the massive human brain, the trade-off was shrinkage in other areas. The chimpanzee's muscles are 27% larger than humans. Don't ever tangle with a chimpanzee. They are so much stronger than you are. The rock. The rock would get wiped out by a chimpanzee that was half his size. because their muscles are so much larger than humans. I just saw him in Jumanji. He's quite a fella, isn't he? The chimpanzee's muscle, okay, we already talked about that. Our guts, our stomachs, and our small intestines are about 60% smaller than that of the chimpanzee. So that's our trade-off. If we evolved from the chimpanzee, and here's the chimpanzee right here, if we evolved from the chimpanzee, then their guts are really big. They've all got really large abdomens, and the reason is because they need to digest food different than we do. So we're humans now, and we have evolved not needing to digest food the same way that the chimpanzees have. And so that's one of the reasons why our brains have grown so large. One reason humans were able to reduce their digestive needs is because we are able to learn to do some of our digestion outside of our bodies. We learned to cook our food. And when we started cooking our food, we were able to break down proteins. We were able to change carbohydrate structures. We were able to utilize starches differently. We're going to talk about that in the next one. Yes, there it is. Cooking substantially increases the amount of energy that can be extracted from food. It denatures protein. It gelatinizes starches. It makes all food softer and easier to digest, thus requiring less energy. So that's the reason that we have such big brains, because we cook our food. Chimpanzees only eat things raw. They don't eat anything cooked. Otherwise, their brains would grow big too. That sounds like a scenario for the Planet of the Apes, doesn't it? We started cooking food, they learned to cook food, and then all of a sudden their brains got just huge. Because of the cooking, humans are able to consume foods that cannot be eaten raw. This reduced the amount of chewing necessary to consume food, reducing the amount of muscle required in the human jaw. It also changed the shape of our teeth. And we can, as we see, all of our teeth are smashing teeth. We don't need sharp incisors so that we can bite chunks of meat off. But if you look at the ape, of course, that's exactly the way that their teeth are. They have to have sharp teeth so that they can rip and tear. We just have smashing teeth. And if we look at the evolution of humans, and we look at the teeth of humans, some humans had teeth that could crush nuts. So they could open a nut with their jaw. And in order to have a jaw that strong, they had a ridge that went across the top of their head. And their jaw muscles were attached to that ridge. So these creatures were able to break nuts with their jaws. Well, try to do that. Take a Brazil nut sometime and try to open that sucker with you'll break your teeth off is what you'll do. So that's one of the things that have happened to humans. Our teeth have changed, as interesting as that is. So if you look at evolutionary biology, if you look at the evolution of humans, it's really fascinating to watch how teeth have changed, how the skull structure has changed, so that the jaw muscles are primarily the reason that it's changed. And of course the rest of everything. And our brain cavity is much, much larger than it used to be. And if you look at the chimpanzees, their brain cavity isn't very big at all. Not compared to ours, about half the size of a human's. The average human spends 1 hour chewing food per day. The average chimpanzee spends about 6 hours chewing food a day, so it's 6 times longer. By cooking our food, we're able to evolve a much smaller digestive tract, which freed up much energy to be used by our brains. So that's one of the reasons why our brains are so big. They're so big. They're just huge. Many primates eat a lot of fruit. Fruit is very important. It's a wonderful form of sugar. It's a good way to get sugar, the lactose. There are good reasons to eat fruit. Fruit is rich in vitamins, carbohydrates, and calories, and fruits tend to be available in concentrated patches. So you can go to an apple tree, you can go to a peach tree, and you get lots and lots of carbohydrates.
You can go to a pawpaw tree. And as we watched humans evolving, humans started planting their own trees, their own fruit trees. And they created whole patches of these fruit trees, apple trees and whatnot, not banana trees. Bananas are actually a hybrid. Pears, pawpaws, apples, especially apples, of course, very consumable as far as humans are concerned. How am I doing? Okay. To live off of a diet of fruit, you need to keep in mind where the various fruit trees are located and when they would likely be bearing ripe fruit. And of course, if you watch the migration of select tribes, they would migrate from one area to the other because of the ripening fruit. They used to do this up north. They don't have a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of fruits and berries up there, but they would go to different areas during different times of the year. And this is the time when the June berries are ripe. It's in June, by the way. June berries are ripe in June. This is when the raspberries are ripe. This is when the blackberries are ripe. This is when, whatever, the gooseberries. Actually, gooseberries come from China. Sorry, there weren't any gooseberries up there. No, but raspberries, lots of raspberries. You have to remember all this stuff. When do they bear fruit? How long do they bear fruit? How long are the raspberries ripe? How long are raspberries ripe? How long are the apples ripe? If you're gonna get fruit out of an apple tree, how long is that going to feed you? How long does it take apples to ripen? Do they ripen in a day and they're gone the next day? No. The top of the tree ripens at a different rate than the bottom of the tree, doesn't it? The more sunshine it gets, the faster it ripens. So the apples at the top are ripe, and then and slowly through the month, the rest of the tree will ripen. And that's the way it works. So you could eat off of an apple tree for an extended length of time. Well, for about a month. How about the raspberries? How long are raspberries ripe? We have raspberries at my house, so I know this. I have this information. We made raspberry pies for about a month. So I was picking raspberries every day for about a month. Is that impressive? I made, no? I made all of these raspberry pies, and we froze most of them. I know, I got real tired of raspberries. How about cherries on a cherry tree? How long do cherries ripen? How long does it take? About 3 weeks. So you can pick cherries for about 3 weeks. And we had cherry pies too. And now I got cherry bush at my house. That's kind of really cute. Okay, so we've got all these trees that are ripening. All of these fruits are ripening at different times. The cherries and the raspberries actually ripened at the same time. When do apples ripen? Any ideas? Apples ripen in the fall. So starting with, well, maybe at the end of August, you'll start having apples, depending on the type of tree it is. And you'll have apples all the way through probably November. Well, potentially November. There, it gets a little cold. The first frost just wipes out all the fruit. So as long as you have, you don't have an early frost, you can probably pick apples until October. And of course, that's one of the reasons why, if you've ever been to an apple orchard, they grow different types of apples. The sweeter the apple, the earlier that it ripens. So you'll get Macintosh in the end of August, the beginning of September. If it's a Red Delicious, I don't know if you guys eat, you know what I'm talking about? If I say Red Delicious, it's not very sweet. It's kind of a bitter apple. It's real dark red. Yeah, that grows. That's one of the last ones to grow. You're leaving. That's okay. No, that's okay. Perhaps the greater need for a good memory and a big brain was triggered by the need to remember fruit locations. So you need to remember where that apple tree is. You need to remember where that pawpaw tree is. Do you guys have any idea what a pawpaw is?
No.
It's actually an American fruit, but it grows in the Midwest. Pawpaws kind of taste like, they're real like slimy,
What a gondola.
but they grow in the Midwest. They taste like bananas. They're nasty. They are really nasty. They're real
Is that a picture
slimy.
of it right there?
Yeah, these are pawpaws. But those are Asian pawpaws, not American pawpaws. Our pawpaws grow in trees, and they're about the size of an apple. But it's real slimy fruit. Yeah. When they ripen, you can't eat them before because they're too bitter. But as soon as they ripen, they're really sweet. But the texture is not one of my favorite textures. Those primates that had better skills at remembering where the fruit was would have been more likely to eat well and have surviving offspring than those who were stumbling about aimlessly trying to find ripe pawpaws. It just didn't happen. And of course, those are the people that couldn't feed their babies, and their babies died. Their babies didn't survive. I know, it's really kind of tragic. And it really all depends. It's really kind of a sad year this year because our apple trees, there was a late frost, and it killed all of the buds. And because we didn't have any flowers on our apple trees, we don't have any apples. So we didn't have any apples this year, even though we've got like 10 apple trees and we're getting nothing from it. Normally we get lots of apples, and of course we make cider out of it. We eat the apples, but usually we just make cider out of it because it's way too many apples to eat. A number of primate species rely on food sources that require a fair bit of ingenuity to access them. Some primate food sources include nuts and seeds encased in hard shells that you have to break. Sometimes they can break them with their jaws. Sometimes they have to use an instrument to do that. The more intelligent the animal, the more likely that they will use a tool to break the coconuts. Have you ever tried to break a coconut? It's not easy. It's hard as a rock. I mean, literally, it's hard as a rock. Tubers that need to be dug up, like potatoes. How do you know where a potato is? Do you know what a potato plant looks like? Does anybody not eat potatoes? Does everybody eat potatoes? Eat French fries? Is there anybody that doesn't eat French fries? No? Where do those French fries come from? Well, the French fry tree, of course. No, you got to dig up the potatoes. So you need to know what a potato plant looks like so that you can dig the damn thing, so you can dig the thing up. Termites that need to be fished out of termite mounds, extractive food sources such as these just mentioned are often worth pursuing because they are rich in protein and energy. What's so good about potatoes? Why is the potato such a good food? What's going on with potatoes? Why can you live off of potatoes? I got news for you. That's what they make vodka out of. They make it out of potatoes. So what's so good about potatoes, other than the vodka, if they're vodka drink? Which I'm not.
Starchy food.
I'm sorry?
It can last a while.
What?
It can last a while.
What, potatoes? You know, you can put it in a root cellar and it'll last all winter. Yeah, you can eat potatoes all winter. But it's starchy. It's starchy. And starch is a sugar. It's a very complex sugar. So whereas fruit are very simple sugars, it's galactose. Galactose is a monosaccharide. It has one saccharide. Starches are polysaccharides. That'll feed you for a really, really long time. So we crave starches. We crave potatoes. We crave that. It's not very sweet, is it? We crave that stuff. And the reason we crave it is because it's a good source of food. It's a good source of nutrition. And we can survive on starches for an extended length of time. Fruits, you lose them that day. It's a very simple sugar. You burn the sugar, now it's gone. So you need to eat that stuff every day. But starches will stay with you for an extended length of time. It's going to give you energy for a long time. So, and that's one of the reasons why we eat starches. It's one of the reasons why we eat fats.
Fat breaks down into sugar. It's very complex and it gives us a lot of energy. So we crave fats. We crave fats, we crave starches. We crave sugars because sugar gives us energy. So we have evolved needing all this stuff. Before Europeans came over here, you guys didn't have very many monosaccharides. You had potatoes. Potatoes are from the Americas. It's from down south. It's from South America. But you had starches. You had corn, which is a starch. So you had all these starches, and you were able to feed yourselves, and the meat that you ate was fairly lean. It was good meat. But then the Europeans got here, and they started feeding you sugars, raw sugar, and you liked it. And then they started feeding you the stuff that they ate. Well, they ate stuff that they had evolved eating this, all these grains. You guys had never eaten that stuff before. All of a sudden, you're eating food that you're not used to, and you're getting sick. You're also developing diabetes, and that's the reason why. They started, instead of feeding you buffalo like you were eating before, or lean ungulates like antelope and deer and elk, they started feeding you cows that had been grazing in a field. Have you ever seen a cow run? Not very often. They had a lot of fat on them. And of course, that was the best cut of meat that they T-bone steak has got a lot of fat in it. Anyway, and that's the reason why you guys had problems with the European food. Because it wasn't the same. They had evolved on this stuff, but you guys hadn't. And of course, that change of diet changed everything. Okay, we'll pick this up next time. And don't forget that you need to think about what culture you want to write about, write your paper about. If you have a group that you're not exactly sure where you can find a book about those individuals, I'll be glad to buy you a book. Isn't that nice? Well, you have to give it back to me so that I can read it myself. So if you see Emery telling me he owes me a book, he's got my book on Mongolia. Anyway, so any culture, and I have lots of books about Japan. I have a couple books about China. One of them is entitled Big Breasts and Wide Hips. And you think, oh my goodness, this must be pornography. It's not. It's not. It's about a family where the women had those attributes, and so they were very successful because all the Europeans that came over wanted to marry them. I mean, it was really kind of funny. It has nothing to do with something. All right. Well, what am I going to do about it?
I wanted to ask you about another thing.
Sure.
I have sort of online.
Okay. Sarah does everything differently than I do.
Yes, I
She's
know.
a cognitive
I saw
psychologist. I don't know what's wrong with those people. I do know
I
what's wrong.
can't understand these laws.
Okay. What are they?
4 different models.
Really? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, 4. Common good.
Okay.
The first one. Second.
All right. Let me look at it.
Did you find the book? Anita? You found the book?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Okay. First choice is common good.
I've read it over and over and over.
Rights of the individual versus the common good. Okay. So that's what is more important, the individual or society? That's all it means. The common
Okay.
good means society. So who wins in an argument between an individual and the society? Normally the society, especially in a collectivist country, but that's what she's talking about.
Can you sign that for me?
Sure.
I'm changing my
Or like-
notifications
One more thing.
and typing.
One more thing.
Right now.
Perfect. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck. Okay, so that's the first. The second one has to do with
quality versus discretion. The question is, how is the judicial system going to look at things? Are they, is everybody the same? Should they look at everybody as the same? Or should they look at select individuals in select circumstances as different from other people? So we're both driving down the road and we're going way faster than we're supposed to. I'm going 70, you're going 70, and the police stop both of us. I'm going 70 because I'm not real bright. You're going 70 because you're on your way to the hospital because your cousin just had a baby, and so that's the reason you're going fast. So should we both get the same ticket? That is what discretion is.
Okay.
So if they decide not to give you a ticket because of that, then that's discretion. And they give me a ticket. Or should we both get a ticket just because we're both in the same street? Yes, ma'am.
So you have to do this now?
Yeah, those are my own. You want this one? Go ask Alice? Sure, you can have that one. Okay, I'll bring you next time. Go ask Alice? No. It goes across. Go ask Alice is about the 60s and 70s. No, it's actually nonfiction, kind of. It's written by anonymous. So some whacked out lady is the one that wrote that book. It's really kind of neat. Really strange things happen to her.
So you're doing that Thursday?
Sure. And if you don't like it, you can pick another. Okay. Yes, sir.
Mongolian.
You want Mongolia? Emery's got it.
Okay, so how do I find it?
I don't know. He said he was going to come and visit me, but he hasn't come. I haven't seen him since like the second day. Ask Avery. Avery can communicate with her. So-
Okay.
Okay.
Avery's son, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry?
Avery's son.
Yeah. Avery's son. Yeah, he's got my book.
I have a question to you.
Sure. And if we can't find Emery, I'll buy another. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
More fun for me. Less fun for you.
I know. Like,
Yes, you do 3 papers, 15 pages. Or you can write one paper that's 15 pages long.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah, you can do that.
Like for this one, I'm really interested in this one, learning about a different culture,
Right.
and I want to learn.
Do you want to use a different Indian tribe?
That would be good too.
Sure. I've got a book about the Crow, I've got a book about the Lakota, the Pine Ridge, and I have a book written by a healer from the Meskwaki Reservation.
You know
Meskwaki.
what would work for me, because the fireplace I use on the roadman
Right.
is Cheyenne. I want to learn more about the Cheyenne people.
Okay, I'll find you a book about the Cheyenne. Okay. That's
So
the key.
can we do that?
Yeah.
15 in this one?
Wait a minute, what are the other 2 classes?
Introduction to counseling, and then
The introduction to counseling, you're going to have to write about whatever your problem is.
okay.
Okay.
So just do all,
Yeah,
all
you
three.
have to do it.
Because the other ones, culture,
Culture.
psychology, and law.
Yeah, okay, psychology and law. I'll tell you, psychology and law, go ahead and do the culture one, and I'll try to find you something from the Cheyenne. You know there's 2 Cheyenne groups.
Yeah.
Southern Cheyenne and Northern Cheyenne.
Northern side.
Northern Cheyenne were the ones that kicked Custer's ass.
Wow.
Yeah, but don't tell the Lakota that, because they think they were part of it. They just went in and butchered them after they were all dead. It was the Cheyenne that defeated
So
Custer.
introduction to counseling and culture.
Right.
10 in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
The reality is the Cheyenne, and they spoke different languages. The Cheyenne speak Algonquian and the Lakota speak Sioux. So the third choice is to discover the truth or to resolve conflicts. So when we are in a criminal case, the idea is, or
to resolve it, like try to go on like a counseling, like an anger management program or?
You've got Donald Trump is trying to buy something, and he sues this other guy because this other guy won't sell him what he wants. Okay. So and of course there's stories there's accusations going back and forth between the two of them. So what do? Do you try to figure out which one of them is telling the truth, or do you try to resolve the conflict? Resolving the conflict doesn't have anything to do with truth. But if you're trying to discover the truth, it's like going to court and...
That's like mediation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do you know if there's another class out there?
I'm sorry?
Any classes after this?
No, this is it. So will that make sense so
Yeah.
far? Okay, fourth choice, science versus the law as a source of decisions. Okay. Okay. The law was written, well, the Constitution was written in 1789. So it's old. I mean, the Constitution is really old. So we can't do what they were doing back then, right? Okay. So things have changed. They had slavery in 1789. We don't have slavery, right? So some of the laws are going to be dated. So do we just follow the laws, or do we change the laws? Do we allow science to update our concept of what's going on? The Bible says that women are supposed to be subservient to men. Do we still follow that model? Old laws on the books, like there are laws against homosexuality. Almost all the states have wrote laws about homosexuality. But science taught us that there's nothing you can do about it. Okay? So the question is, do we follow the law strictly? Do we follow the Constitution strictly as written in 1789? Or do we allow things to change, to evolve, to be
Okay.
progressive? There's one more.
No, that's just one.
There's only four.
Yeah.
Four. Sarah and I teach different.
Yep.
And we have different ideas.
And most of it is just from, hers is just mostly from the book. Read.
I like to explain things to people so that they understand.
I really wish I would have changed it to your class.
Then you'd have to come in, sit in class.
You can do that.
I started the internship too with Great Lakes, so
Okay.
I wasn't able to.
Yeah. That's
All right.
okay. If you need anything else explained, Sarah's always right, so, but I will try to explain it the best way possible.
Okay.
Okay.